Hello and welcome to another edition of Shaka Extra Time. I am Paul Ndiho, and joining me on Shaka Extra Time live on Facebook is Shaka Sali himself, aka the Kabale Kid. Hello, Shaka.
Hugely terrific for you, Betty. Hugely terrific.
I can only imagine.
You definitely know why, don't you?
Yes, thank you. A warm welcome to all our Facebook followers watching us live from all over the world. Today is going to be an exciting day. We, of course, are talking about the events in Zimbabwe, and we'll be taking your questions shortly. Shaka, today, what a remarkable day in the history of Zimbabwe and on the continent.
Remarkable indeed, and to be very honest with you, Paul, I can't find the exact or the right words with which to express myself about the events in Zimbabwe. You're talking about end of an era? Absolutely, it's end of an era because, let's face it, Robert Gabriel Mugabe was the leader of Zimbabwe since April 18, 1980. And it is only today, my friend, which is of course Tuesday, the 21st, 2017, that he steps down. And he actually steps down, frankly, as a paper president. Somebody tried to characterize him because guess what? He even tried, in fact, to hold a cabinet meeting earlier today. And the cabinet members or whatever sort of snubbed him, really, because they didn't think that he had any power any longer to exercise.
You know, last week, you and I were talking about a creeping coup. Now that creeping coup has resulted into the resignation of Robert Gabriel Mugabe. What a day.
Very interesting, and let's face it, Robert Mugabe will go down in history. First of all, frankly, as at least someone that had the opportunity to interview him, I can tell you that the man was remarkably articulate, remarkably charismatic, remarkably very proud as a president, of course, of Zimbabwe, and also as an African statesman.
Interesting. What led to this? Did it have to go this way? President Mugabe is a liked man. He was liked for all these years. The people who kept him in power are the same people who have taken him out of power. What does this say about African leaders staying too long, perhaps in power for, I guess, personal reasons?
Especially, in fact, when not only do they stay long, but they end up, in fact, personalizing the state. The control of the state pretty much becomes like a farm, like a personal farm. Everything is like a personal property. They disregard, for example, the existing or obtaining state institutions, for example. So they actually become the state, so to speak. It's just like, of course, we talk about, of course, a former great king or emperor of France. L'état c'est moi. I am the state, and the state is me. I think in Zimbabwe, it was, in fact, it took Dr. Grace Mugabe, who's 2 months, by the way, and Doctor of Philosophy in Sociology, also happens to be on the line, because the last time I checked, the students of the University of Zimbabwe apparently refused to take exams. And part of their demand is that the degree that was awarded to Dr. Grace Mugabe actually be recalled, so that she can have the opportunity to be called other names like Gucci Grace or this Grace. To be honest with you, she provided a great opportunity, a very rare opportunity to the Zimbabwean army, which obviously felt that it had a sense of entitlement, because let's face it, it's not really a Zimbabwean national army. It's an armed wing of the ruling party, ZANU-PF. And the moment President Mugabe fired the crocodile, Emerson Mnangagwa, it was very, very clear that they were about to enter into a new era. And that new era would not be controlled by them. So they said, you know what, this is game up.
I've seen a lot of adjectives used to describe Dr. Grace Mugabe as a philanthropist, as a patriotic citizen, as a prospective business person, politician, so many other adjectives used to describe her. But one thing that comes to mind for me personally, I think that she overplayed her hand. Do you agree with that kind of assessment?
She definitely did, but she came very, very close, very, very close to pretty much getting really whatever she wanted. But unfortunately, I think the Zimbabwean army or the armed wing of ZANU-PF saw it and felt otherwise. And you have to give it credit, because when you think about from the time they actually took over, even though they kept saying that this was not a military coup, we are simply going after the criminals surrounding the president and his family and what have you. The last time I checked, when you look at the Zimbabwean constitution, they do not have the powers to play a police role. They are not the police of Zimbabwe. But let's face it, they have been extremely disciplined. And you also have to give it to the people of Zimbabwe, because let's face it, when you think about the manner in which they have behaved, and you're talking about people behaving in the context of a country that is impoverished, you have not even had a single report of looting or any attempt of that. So you really have to give credit to the people of Zimbabwe, the National Army, and everybody involved, even including, of course, the opposition.
You just brought up an interesting point. Maybe a lot of people on social media, before we got the comments, they're saying that General Constantino Chiwenga should actually be the president, because he has managed really to, he's become the hero of sorts to bring about change in Zimbabwe, instead of giving it to Emerson Mnangagwa.
He definitely has earned it, if you will, but then again, he is a loyal soldier, and he takes instructions from his boss, the crocodile. But I think that he has a great future. If he really wants to be in politics, it's quite possible that at some later point, he could actually become president of Zimbabwe, especially if the goodwill from the Zimbabwean people remain. You know, as I saw events in the Zimbabwean capital, Harare, to be honest with you, Paul, I was reminded by the same events that I actually saw through newspapers, magazines, and what have you, back in 1974 in Lisbon, the capital of Portugal, when the captain's coup brought an end to a dictatorship, and hence the end of the Lusophonic colonial power in Africa. We're talking about Mozambique, Angola, Cape Verde, Sao Tome and Principe, and of course Guinea-Bissau. So to be honest with you, you had soldiers in tanks, you had soldiers in the APCs, you had soldiers having these basic personal rifles, receiving flowers from beautiful young Portuguese women and men, you know, thanking them for the effort that they had just completed. And you can see the same kind of optics really playing in the capital Harare. It's incredible, and I think this is a very, very proud day for Africa, because this is one story, frankly, when you think about Zimbabwe, for so many years, we're talking about probably since 2000, especially since Mugabe took away the farms from white commercial farmers, who are about 4,500, and apparently who controlled the country's economy and controlled more than 75% of the prime land in that particular country. We have not seen a lot of interesting stories coming out of that particular, country. But this one is huge, really. This is huge. You have a very proud people, a people that are very disciplined, a people that have reason really to be happy. And I hope that this happiness does not end with the stepping down of President Mugabe, but hopefully with the incoming president, so that probably he can actually include all the main stakeholders as far as the country is concerned, so that they can together chart the way forward, at least in a sort of context that you would characterize as a democratic dispensation.
Let's go to comments. Let's start in Uganda. Interesting. Adona Bosco wants to know if you think what happened to Robert Mugabe will make African dictators plan for their exit soon, or will it make them re-strategize to stay longer?
Well, you see, Mugabe is not the first dictator that has lost power the way he has. There are so many others that lost power, even in different circumstances. You talk about people like, the brother leader. You talk about brother leader Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, a man who ended up hiding in a pipe, and eventually you find his body actually in a butchery. The man had been in power for 42 years, Paul. And then you talk about people like Mobutu Sese Seko Wazabanga, of what was then Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of Congo, a man who had been in power for 32 years, and you remember that it was a few countries in that particular neighborhood acting as nyamparas of some external powers in order to get rid of that man. And yet, in that particular region itself, apart from probably a former Angolan president, José Eduardo dos Santos, who after 38 years has stepped down and in fact presided over a peaceful transition of power from himself to someone else. A lot of those people in the neighborhood, talking about Sassou Nguesso of the Republic of Congo, or used to be known as Congo Brazzaville. The guy has been there, almost about 32 years. Then you talk about Yoweri Kaguta Museveni. He has been in power for 31 years, and in fact, as we talk, he is in the business of trying again, one more time, to do what some people characterize as political constitutional shifting of the goalposts, so that they can remove the age limit of 75. He says people around that age are discriminated against, so that in fact he can become a presidential monarch. I hope Mr. Museveni takes a leaf really, or borrows a leaf from Harare, because in fact when I remember last week, he was one of the few African leaders that initially characterized the effort by the Zimbabwean army as a coup, and that they should restore the country to a constitutional order. I guess he realized that, you know what, it could happen to him. But I honestly think that this time around, he looks at his brother and friend, Robert Gabriel Mugabe, the manner in which he has left the stage, and say, you know what, I think it is high time I can go back to Rwachitura and do what I have often told people, that I have a lot of cows and I love them so much, I can go and spend my evening years attending to those cows.
Let's go to Nick in the United Kingdom. He says, hooray, hooray, this has been a long time coming. Good riddance, the people of Zimbabwe, more power to the people of Zimbabwe. And he continues to say that it reminds him of the 1989 coup that saw this guy from Romania, Nicholas Ceausescu, being overthrown. That's exactly what the people of Zimbabwe did.
Very interesting, but a little bit different, because Nikolai Ceausescu did not get the opportunity, for example, to get what I would characterize as a dignified, humiliating exit. Because for him, the people came to the palace, and the security forces refused to protect him, and he started running with his wife. And then he was arrested by the security forces. They had a very quick or a sprint type of, kind of like trial, and then actually executed him and his wife. So it's a little bit different, because here you have a situation where the soldiers of Zimbabwe will come and salute President Comrade Robert Mugabe and actually tell him that he is the president and that he is still the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, including their own army. But they would not be taking orders or instructions from him. Instead, they would be the ones, in fact, ordering this president, paper president, as some said. So that's why I characterized it, frankly, as a sort of dignified, humiliating exit.
Let's go to Zambia. Stevelis Mweya, he says, the term crocodile suits Emerson. He saw an opportunity and took it. Rather an opportunist. He talks about how Emerson Mnangagwa, who has been part of Mugabe's since the revolution, they were incarcerated together, they were in jail together. This guy has been working alongside the former president. Now he's going to take over his mantle. He thinks that he saw an opportunity and went for a kill. Do you agree with that kind of assessment?
I think, first of all, again, it will be recalled that the opportunity was, in fact, presented by the Zimbabwean First Lady, Dr. Grace Mugabe, who obviously had successfully persuaded her husband that he should be the one to succeed him, and hence the expulsion of the vice president, the crocodile, Emerson Mnangagwa. But I think that the reaction was very swift, and it showed that he commanded loyalty and respect among his comrades, because he was one of those Bush war heroes. In fact, he was associated with President Robert Mugabe since 1976. This is a man who is very highly trained militarily. He first trained in Tanzania, Egypt, and went to China. He also went to the University of Zambia, where he obtained a law degree, and then became a personal assistant to President Mugabe. They were really, really like father and son, having gone through the experiences of master and servant.
Shaka, a lot of people here on Facebook want you to talk about the professionalism and in the manner in which they handle this whole thing. It could have gotten ugly. More people could have died on the streets, but they were handled it with such grace and class. What do you say about that kind of professionalism exhibited by the Zambian defense Zimbabwean defense forces?
To be honest with you, very admirable. There's no question. It was awesome. I just hope that they continue doing this, but you know that in the past they had problems, for example, with the opposition leaders. You realize the optics where they would sometimes security forces rough up, for example, opposition leader Morgan Changilai. They would beat him and do all sorts of things. But I hope that the army, the security forces as it were, has actually moved forward. It has moved forward, moved away from that type of behavior. They have definitely demonstrated that they deserve respect. And again, they have actually made the African continent very, very, very proud. You also have to, again, give credit, frankly, to the ordinary Zimbabwean citizen. Because let's face it, they could have at least tried to loot or something, because they are actually very hungry, most of them. They have not had employment, they had not money, but yet they were really calm, they were very disciplined, they were just like ladies and gentlemen. And I hope they can sustain this. And the only way they can do that, I think, again, is to make sure that they have a sort of an arrangement that brings about a government that has a semblance of national unity, so that they can actually sit down and seriously discuss the issues at hand, so that they can chart the way forward. They shouldn't, in fact, be in a hurry of having elections sometime early next year. They should probably have an interim government for 2 or 3 years or whatever, and actually make sure that they put in place They put in place the rules of the game that are respected by everybody, so that at least for the first time, since independence really, they can have an election that is credible, an election that is whose results is verifiable, an election whose results represent and reflect the will of the people, and not the will of the gun or the will of the individual that announces the results, or the will of the people that are privileged to count the votes.
Let's go to another Facebook comment from Grandi Momanyi. The unprecedented developments we have witnessed in Zimbabwe, culminating to his resignation, is good news to those leaders pushing their wives, sons, and daughters to inherit their seats. And he gives an example of DRC, Uganda, and Rwanda.
Well, of course, you even have Cameroon. You can talk about Equatorial Guinea, where Teodoro Obiang has actually been in power for 38 years. And as far as the country is concerned, it's just like a personal property, personal farm. And his vice president, as you know, happens to be his son. His son is vice president. And they control everything, including perhaps the oxygen that people actually need in order to breathe and stay alive.
We don't seem to be getting any comments supporting dictators to stay in power. Let's go to another comment from Edison Monday. He says, let other dictator presidents we have in Africa learn from Mugabe's fate. When the nation says they no longer want your service, you must live in peace.
Yes,
Not
indeed.
wait until they kick you out.
Yes, indeed. And frankly, let's face it, these dictators sometimes are contributing some positive things, really. But because they overstay, abuse power, and are so contemptuous of their own citizens and what have you, to the extent that they almost deal with them as if they are actually sharecroppers. I think that they should take, again, they should really borrow a leaf from what has just happened in Harare. And for that, I should frankly appeal to a man like President Museveni, for example, to stay away from this business of trying to remove the age limit so that he can actually stay as a presidential monarch. He does not have the argument, for example, like he used sometimes to use, that he succumbs to the power, the pressure of the people because they love him so much, as if in fact Uganda cannot do without him. I think it is time that some of these individuals, sincerely, who look at themselves as uniquely gifted, as people who are sort of political God's gifts to their countries, it's a high time they looked themselves in the mirror and said, you know what, I think I have done enough, I've made enough contribution, let me go, let me step aside so that someone else can come, pick up the baton, and see where he can take the country. I don't like these people who think themselves as if, again, they are uniquely gifted to the extent that they can actually boast that they are the only people with the vision thing. In other words, the only individual who can think. The rest, just like cows, just follow or essentially implement whatever whims, or whatever things that the dictator wants.
Let's go to another comment. They want to know, Shaka, you've covered Africa for a long time, but what other moment reminds you of what happened today in Zimbabwe?
I think the other moment that comes to mind immediately, sincerely, is the end of apartheid in South Africa and the independence of South Africa, meaning that you did, for the first time, at least have an election in which every community, including black people, participated. And that election produced a man, a great man, a man that has very, very few equals, really. I'm talking about the Madiba, when he became president of the Republic of South Africa in 1994, I think, if I remember correctly. That was one of the few great moments that I honestly recall. I even recall when Madiba, before he became president, he actually visited the United States. And I happened to be in New York at that time. You should have seen New York. The man actually took over New York City. New York City. He took over New York City. And not for bad reasons, but for good reasons. Just like a conquering hero without bullets.
Yeah, in fact, you remind me of one incident when I was a young kid. I remember President Robert Mugabe coming to Uganda, and I was one of those kids who lined up at the streets. Today, I'm 40 years old, and I've been alive as much as he's been in power. It's a remarkable day for the people of Zimbabwe. Let's go to another quick commenter from Zimbabwe. Moses Simpiwa. Zimbabweans must be proud of themselves. No car burnt, no building on fire, no spilling of blood, and no life lost. Your thoughts, Shaka?
I couldn't agree with Moses more. Again, we have to really give credit where it belongs. I think that the soldiers of Zimbabwe, the people of Zimbabwe, make us very, very proud. And as I said a little bit earlier, there have not been very many interesting stories out of that country, nor, in fact, from the continent for that matter. But this particular story, I am sure it will endure. It is one of those days that you look back and say, oh my God, I'm very, very glad to have been alive when Robert Gabriel Mugabe stepped aside without being killed, because let's face it, he is an independence hero. He loved his country very much, at least he said, and he did some very good things. He had one of the best educational policies, for example. Zimbabwe is one of the most literate countries, not only in Africa, but globally. It also has some of the most best educated people, except that in as far as the governance aspect is concerned, it has been really, really second rate, if not third rate.
Yeah. Shaka, what are you talking about on Straight Talk tomorrow?
Interestingly, we shall be continuing tomorrow, looking at reaction from Zimbabwe, from the region, from the rest of the world, and it is coming in a lot. We'll look at Zimbabwe, we'll look, of course, at the just concluded Kenyan Supreme Court ruling that Uhuru Kenyatta will serve the next 5 years as the president of Kenya, and we hope that he too will find a way of bringing about conditions, frankly, that can make Kenya become a great country again. I think it is high time, Paul, that Africa moves away from this business of winner takes it all. Because in most cases, actually, they don't even win anyway. They steal the elections, they rig the elections. They should adopt proportional representation so that everybody is part of the ballgame.
Very briefly, any lessons learned from Zimbabwe, very briefly?
If I were, for example, Equatorial Guinea President Theodore Obiang, I would step aside. If I were Yoweri Museveni, I would do the same. If I were Kagame, I would say I'm human. If I were Paul Biya, I would do exactly the same thing. We do not need dictators. We just need leaders here, and leaders who are representing their own people, not their stomachs.
On that note, thank you so much, Shaka, for your insight. I look forward